Live again. Come on in, everybody. So, last class of the day. We hope you found it as enjoyable as we have. We've spent some time today already talking about teenagers. This is why we saved this for last, because if we could tell you everything we know about teenagers, it would last about 30 seconds when we could get out of here early. So that's why we save it for last. So, we've talked a little bit about teens, but we haven't even told you what a teen is. We haven't had a discussion about that. So, did you know that the whole concept of teens, adolescence, is a 20th century thing? There's no one acknowledged teenagers before that. In the Old Testament, you were either a child or an adult. When you were a child, you were subject to your parents' authority and lived under their home, and then you became an adult. And in my Jewish tradition, that officially happened when you were 13 and were considered man enough to lead the family, and you had a bar mitzvah. So let me tell you, when I was 13, I wasn't even mad enough to lead. I had a hamster. I was pretty good with that, but that's about it. So, God, when you're an adult, you're responsible to God for your decisions and your choices, but not when you're a teen. Where does your teen fall? It's kind of on that cusp between adolescence and adulthood, and that's the problem. You don't know where your authority begins and ends and God's begins. You don't know where their obedience. So it's a confusing time of life. Unfortunately, because of changing standards, the world doesn't have a whole lot of wisdom to share about teenagers, about adolescents. It's kind of expected in the United States that your teens will automatically be rebellious and obnoxious. As soon as, like magic, when they hit the teen years, they're going to be rebellious and obstinate and truculent and obnoxious, like it's a thing. It's a hormonally precipitated thing. That's why we come up with words like sowing their wild oats. Oh, they're just sowing their wild oats. It's predicted that they're going to have a terrible relationship, and the media does nothing to discourage this. If you look at the shows that are most popular with teens, they usually make the adults in authority look like idiots and are very disrespectful. Even when our kids were teens, those many years ago, and they would watch Disney Channel, which presumably is safe and family friendly, but most of those stories, the principal of the school or the parents looked like idiots, So we just think it's this natural change that happens between 12 and 20 that teens automatically become obnoxious, like it's in their owner's manual to do that. But they are on this weird cusp between childhood and adulthood. They're trying to become independent, which is good. We want them to become independent, but they lack judgment. That's why they still need us, even though they don't know it and they don't believe it. And they don't like to admit it, but they still rely on us because we have the judgment and the experience. So there you are, you're in this precarious position. You're trying to encourage their independence, but you're also trying to cram in as many life lessons as you can. Now, I get it. As we get older, we see that our time with our teens slipping away, right? So it's like, oh my goodness, the clock is ticking. I better smush in as many life lessons as I can in the next 4 years before they go off to college, which sets up an awkward dynamic where you're always trying to educate your teen and you're always trying to, don't let any moment go untaught about something. So the first suggestion we have for you, the first rule about taking care of and raising teens is enjoy your teen. What? Is that even possible? Enjoy your teen. Believe it or not, they're pretty interesting. They can be pretty interesting if you get them in the right, circumstances, if you appreciate them as people. Now, that takes a little work. The first thing you got to do is figure out what they're into and what they like and kind of get into it with them. Now, that doesn't mean you guys have to learn how to play Minecraft, but you do need to know what it is. The benefits of us being child psychologists is routinely we're kept in the loop about what's popular at any given moment. So that's why I even know what Minecraft is and all the other stuff they do when they watch. But this is the time, you don't have to just cram in life lessons. It's the time to develop a person-to-person relationship with them. They are finally free-thinking, slightly less egocentric organisms with whom you can have a pretty decent conversation. Now, if you have more than one child, it's going to be easier with some of your kids than with others, right? you have a natural affinity towards one child, and let's just admit it. So we have three kids, 2 girls and a boy. So naturally, who did I have the easiest time getting along with was my son. We were interested in the same things. We both love sarcastic cartoons. We both love martial arts. That was easy. That was an easy one. We have virtually the same personality. We always got along well. Our eldest kid was into Disney princesses and ballet. I didn't know anything about Disney princesses until I made it a point to. I didn't know anything about ballet, although my wife's a ballerina as well. How many ballet recitals did I sit through where I learned the one important lesson is to wear shoes that you can slip off and put your barefoot on cold concrete, it will help you stay awake. That is the deep lesson I learned from attending all that stuff. The point is, you got to do something. You have to get into their world, even if it isn't inherently interesting to you. That's how you make a connection. This is the time to start connecting with them. And not every second has to be a lesson. And you have to have time where not only are you not teaching lessons, but you're not critical, you're not judgmental, you're not being sarcastic, you're not doing any of that, you're just enjoying that person as a person. You'll actually find that kid is turning into an interesting human being if you have them under the right circumstances. Mary's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So are you guys beginning to understand why the only time we have big fights is when we do these workshops? I'm just throwing that out there, okay? I want to encourage you with preteens and teens, keep talking with them about everything. Keep talking with them about everything. I think as parents, what happens is when, our teens, our preteens and teens are they're trying to figure out who they are in the world and what kind of life they're going to have for themselves, And so they try on all these new ideas, and they say things sometimes just for shock value, right? I mean, just to get a rise, okay? And so I think as parents, we can go to 2 extremes in how we react to that. Some parents just, when their teens start saying things that they don't approve of, they just kind of divorce themselves from the teens. Well, we're just not going to talk about that anymore. We're not going to talk about that issue anymore because they're saying crazy things, so we're not going to talk about that anymore. The other extreme is as parents, we try to dictate to them how to think and how to feel about things. No, you can't feel that way. You have to feel this way about it, Both of those shut down communication with our teens, I think this is a time that we've got to encourage them to tell us what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and we've got to be able to express to them this is how I think about it too. Let's talk about that. We feel differently about this. It truly is a time to learn how to speak the truth in love to your kids, without it being this upset, angry, event, all right? That you've got to learn how to speak the truth in love. And it takes a lot of time and effort. The other thing it takes is that we can't get angry when our kids say something crazy to us during these periods. What happens as a parent, I've been there, we've raised 3 kids, They say something outlandish or something that makes you so terrified for them that you just respond in anger, And as soon as that happens, communication is cut off. That's it. It's over with. That conversation is over with. This is truly a time to put James 1 into practice. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God deserves. Let me just give you an example of when this happened in our house and we handled it the right way. A lot of times we didn't handle it the right way, all right? This is one we actually pulled off correctly. Our son, when he was 15, 16 years old, he was in high school and he took his first government class, political science class, took his first class. So at the ripe old age of 15 or whatever, he came home and he announced to us, well, I'm in this class and I've looked at all these political systems and I have decided communism is the perfect political system. Perfect political system. Now, as a parent, you want to jump on that, right? Everything in you wants to go, ah! But, we were able to not get upset, not go in that direction. And we talked with him and we said, if everybody was a Christian and there was no sin in the world, that might work. That's what Acts 2 talks about, is having everything in common. But the fact is, people are not sinless. People are selfish, and people are prideful, and people want power for themselves, and people oppress other people. And so let's talk about how this actually played out in most places that took on that government system, Now, it's interesting because he's now a big fancy attorney working in the Attorney General's office in Georgia. He was trying on things that he was actually interested in, but it sounded outlandish at the time. It sounded crazy and frightening to us at the time. He's just thinking about things that later on would become a real interest to him. So don't go there. When your teens say these crazy things, sometimes they're just trying to see how you respond. Sometimes they're actually interested in your response to things. I see a lot of adolescent girls in my practice, and usually they're going through some things. And a lot of times we'll be talking about dating, or we'll be talking about sex or something like that. And I will say, what do your mom and dad think about this? And they can tell me exactly what mom and dad think about it, So you may think your teens are not listening to you when you say some of these things, but they do listen to you when you say these things. They may not agree with you, but they are hearing you, and that's important. One of my favorite scriptures is Deuteronomy 6, verse 4-7. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. And the scripture talks about this ongoing conversation between parents and children, right? Right? Where you're talking with them about what you believe, and you're also drawing them out. You're drawing them out as well. With teens, Michael said earlier, there's an appropriate time to say, do this because I say so. Teens is not the time to do that, all right? Teens need to know the whys of things. They need to know what the consequences of not following God's laws look like. I know with our kids, when they were growing up, we spent hours talking about the consequences of being yoked with unbelievers, for instance. What did that look like? And what kind of problems did that cause in a relationship? And even examples of people that we knew, how did that work out for them? They need to know that God's laws are not just there to make life difficult. God's laws are there to protect them. That there's a reason. God gives us those laws so that our life will be great. So they need to know what the consequences are, the whys behind the laws. So this is a time to do a lot of that kind of talking.
What Mary said just triggered something I just have to address for 1 minute. This is really the topic of a completely different seminar, so please have us come back to talk about it. But when she was talking about shock value and teens experimenting with things just to see, I immediately thought of this emerging gender preference, gender identity crisis that we're seeing. And oh my goodness. In the last few years, let me tell you, our teen patients, we hear this more and more and more. Gender identity, sometimes gender identity disorder, where they think they're another gender, but gender preference. What am I trying to say? I'm sorry? New gender confusion. But what happens usually is this. So we'll have teens come in and say, I have a little group of teen girl patients who I do particularly well with. I see them one at a time, not in a group. But the reason I do well with them is not because I'm a great psychologist. It's because they've never had a dad, a decent dad, who listens to them and respects their opinion. I've got these 4 or 5 girls that are all in high school, and I do well with them because I give them something their dads have never given them. Now, periodically, I'll hear from one of them, I think I'm gay. Apparently, there are many different terms. There's not just homosexual. There's bisexual. There's bicurious. There's biamorous. There's multiamorous. They keep me informed of what all these words are. And I'll say, so they'll say these things to me that they're too afraid to say to their dads. I think I'm a homosexual. And I'll say, well, that means you have sex with people of your same gender. Is that true? And she'll say, no, I've never had sex. And I'll say, well, that means you're asexual. You're actually not a homosexual. So what I'm saying is, without going into another seminar, sometimes kids will say these things. They're testing them out. They're doing what all the cool kids are doing. As we explore it in the office, they have no clue what they're talking about. So we'll spend a couple of sessions with each one of these girls or boys and talk to them about gender identity, gender preference, Most of the time, they have no clue what they're talking about. But we don't shut them down. We don't get mad. We don't say, no, you will never speak that word in my office again. We don't do that. That's why they're more apt to talk to me than their own dads. So you see, you get the idea, right? If you want us to talk more about that, you call us. We'll come back. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about dads again, since we're talking about communication. Proverbs 25, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. You know, teens' minds are the things that are shallow, but their hearts are deep waters. And as dads, we have to show some discretion. We have to be able to draw our teens out. And it's hard for men to do. Why? Because men are so used to submerging their own feelings, right? They've spent a lifetime doing that, submerge their own feelings into deep waters. They have a hard time connecting with teens at an emotional level. So it's very important for dads to connect with their teens at an emotional level, which is very difficult to do. But it's traversing deep waters. Think about it. You don't traverse deep waters in a short amount of time. It takes a long time to traverse deep waters. So I'm telling dads that they have to be intentional and they have to take time to learn how to connect with their teens at an emotional level, and it's not easy. So how do you do it? One is dads are going to have to learn how to be vulnerable. Now, that doesn't mean disclosing everything about your life to your teen. There's some stuff they don't need to hear about, some sins we've struggled in. They don't need to hear it in detail, but it will help them to see that we as dads can be vulnerable, that we can be in touch with our own feelings and express our feelings to our teens. This sounds simple and self-evident, but it's very difficult for dads to do. So dads, don't be afraid to show your feelings, your emotions to your teens. Now, if you're not a good talker, if you're not naturally good at this kind of thing, that's okay, because it doesn't always have to be done verbally, okay? Most of us know how to write. It can be something in written form. You can write a card to your teen and be vulnerable. Not a technical manual or a blueprint. A heartfelt thing that you write and you take time to compose to be vulnerable and expose your feelings. Now, I also want to talk about the importance of dads showing appropriate physical affection to their teens. Now, I probably don't need to flesh out what we mean appropriate between father and daughter, for example, but I can tell you this. Psychological science has always consistently found that lack of physical affection from a father, not only to a daughter but to a son, is one of the highest predictors of sexual misbehavior in teens later on. So what I'm saying is, for dads and boys, it doesn't have to be hugging and kissing, okay? Physical affection with boys can take a number of, I was saying, I did Taekwondo for 25 years, and for part of that time, my son took Taekwondo too. So when he was a teen, our physical affection wasn't usually hugging and kissing. It was him provoking me in Taekwondo. That's the way I knew he loved me and was craving that affection. So he'd come up to me, come on, Dad, side kick to the shoulder, come on, Dad, until I gave in, and then, we beat each other up. And that's how, so it can be wrestling. It can be a pat on the back. It can be a slap on the back. That's what I'm talking about, appropriate. That's the way animals are in the wild, fathers and sons, teaches them to be fighters and predators and stuff like that. So that's what I'm talking about. But it's very important. It's one of the biggest predictors of sexual misconduct, especially dads with their daughters. And appropriate behavior with your daughter. I'm talking about being verbally affectionate, telling her how beautiful she is, how much you love her, dancing with her at the senior prom, things like that. Now, this takes humility. We have to suspend as dads, as the kids get to be teens. We've got this, we don't like to admit it, but dads, especially in households with sons, we have an alpha male mentality. Now, you might deny it on the outside, but it's in the inside, it's true. We don't like to relinquish power and authority in our household. So we don't like being challenged by sons, you know. We got to suspend this whole alpha top dog mentality. If you've been wrong, as I said in the first class, dads, to your teens, you've got to admit your mistakes. And, you know, you can admit your mistakes without relinquishing authority. In fact, it's a godly quality that you can admit your mistakes and apologize and ask for forgiveness. Now, that having been said, let's talk about discipline. We got to go back to our chart of rewards and punishments. For teens, punishment by application is no longer ethical, nor is it effective. You know, spanking a teen will get you not really anywhere except anger. But we can increase good behaviors through rewards and through regular reinforcement, like allowance. You know, as we said, our paycheck is positive reinforcement for work-related behavior. Allowance can be positive reinforcement for appropriate behavior in the household, as long as you're specific. And don't breed a little lawyer. You're specific about what your kids need to do to get allowance and how much they get for each task, even if it means writing it down. So we can also negatively reinforce by stopping our nagging, as Mary said. You have to stop it, though. A lot of us keep nagging, dads especially, even when a task is done. We will stay on it and nag it to death because you didn't do it to my specifications or to my level of perfection. Mary and I had I'm kind of the micromanager dad, you know, like big things, usually not on my radar, you know, if your kid's going to become a juvenile delinquent or something like that, I'm, you know, okay, whatever. But don't leave toothpaste behind the sink. I will be all over you about that. So it's part of my character that when I feel like my world's getting away from me, I tighten up with my little OCD little kind of things, you know. So I would get on the kids all the time. What's this doing on the floor? Why is there toothpaste behind the faucet? These little things, and I would nag and micromanage. Mary brought it to my attention, called me out, Steve, on my own sin, which was perfectly appropriate. And I realized she was right, so we made an agreement. Honey, every time you catch me doing that, micromanaging, we've got a symbol. It's going to be this, emulating me nagging. And my promise to you, Mary, is that every time you catch me doing that and you do this, I will stop immediately. So even dads can nag, is what I'm saying. And we've got to stop that to increase positive behavior. Now, as for punishment by omission, taking things away from teens, as Mary said, is the preferred way to do things. What do we have to take away from our teens? Fortunately, there is a large menu of such things. Media, driving privileges, contact with their friends, air, clothing, medical care. I don't care what it is. We've got lots of stuff to take away from our teens. Here's the thing. Parents often forget that they have the authority to take these things away. Or they think it's barbaric to exercise this authority by taking things away. Now, I have to admit, I'm pretty frustrated hearing parents come into my office and say, talking about, I can't take away his cell phone, referring to their son, or their cell phone or their computer. Whose cell phone is it? And I will assure parents that they have was it not your name on the contract that committed us to this phone and this plan? Was it not you who laid out the money to buy that computer? So I believe in empowering parents to remember that they have the authority to take these things away. And it's a funny thing. Sometimes I'll have a really disobedient, rebellious adolescent in the office, adolescent boy usually. And I'll take them back to the office and I'll say, all right, what is it you want? Why are you being so obnoxious? What is it you want from your parents? Well, I want them to leave me alone. Okay? That's a place to start. So you're saying, if they leave you alone and let you do whatever you want, you'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah, that's all they got to do. And I'll say, you don't think you owe this to your parents to obey them, to be under their authority? I don't owe them anything. At that point, I take out my legal pad, and I'll say, let's fact check this. Couldn't help but notice you're not naked. Did you buy those clothes? Did that come out of your paycheck? No. So, all right, they give you clothing. You seem to be in reasonably good health. You're not malnourished. Did you buy the food that is in your belly as of right now? No. So, oh, they give you clothing. Had any infectious diseases lately? No? Okay, they must be giving you good medical care. And we'll go down this litany of, and then we get to the cell phone business. He takes away my cell phone. Oh, really? Did you pay for that contract? Is it your name on the contract? I come up with this list, and I say, so you're telling me that you owe your parents, they're doing all this for you, and you owe them nothing in return. Usually they're caught dead to rights at that point, and then the negotiations can begin. I want parents to know that they gave their children those things. And as long as they live in that household, this is not a democracy. The parents have the power to giveth or taketh away. Parents have the power to do that. Kids are not entitled, we'll talk about this in a minute, of media, they're not entitled to privacy. That media is subject to the inspection of the parent that paid for that thing in the first place. So I just want parents to be empowered. However, let's give some advice about how to do this effectively. One, once again, to not breed, I keep saying breed a lawyer, but we've actually done that. Yes, we've got two of them. My son and my son-in-law are both lawyers, so I guess we bred a lawyer. But number one, you have to make the terms exactly clear. What it is that will earn what being taken away, okay? Otherwise, we're going to have little lawyerly debaters, so we have to make it very clear. What is the behavior that will earn you having this thing taken away? Whatever it is, no more being disrespectful to your sister. Well, what's disrespectful mean? Let's get specific about that. No more calling her names. No more swearing at home. No more lighting matches in your basement. No more causing nuclear reactors to go offline. I mean, it's whatever. So be very specific. That's one piece of advice. Make the terms absolutely clear. Then, my advice to parents of teens is when you deprive a child of something, you have to make it clearly defined amount of time, but make it relatively short. Because this is what happens. If a parent takes away a computer or a cell phone, miraculously that teen starts behaving better. The parent wants to ride this wave of success, so they say, oh, we're just going to keep, when do I get it back, Dad? Well, let's see how you do. You're doing good. Let's see how long you can go. You can't do that. The other thing is this. If you make it a long period of time of deprivation, if you say, I'm taking this away for a month, you just lost your cell phone for a month. Between now and the end of that month, what if he goofs up again? Then what do? Well, you just lost it for another month. So that's 2 months you don't have your computer. What if they mess up again? Well, that's 3 months. Eventually, it's going to lose all meaning. You ever see the movie The Breakfast Club? There's a scene in The Breakfast Club where the principal is threatening the guy with, well, you just got another Saturday detention. So, well, there's another one. So, I now have you in detention to the year 2050. It becomes meaningless. So my advice to parents of teens is deprive for a short, clearly defined period of time. And even if it's just a day, you lost this video game for a day. Tomorrow it's a new day, you get another chance. And lastly, before we take our mandated break, stick to it. Teens will wear you down, convincing you that your course of action is unethical and useless and ineffective. They will go head to head and think they can wear you down, so eventually you'll give up. So once again, consistency is the key. If you look back at Leviticus 26, how many times did the Israelites disobey God? You can't even count it. Every time they did, God did the same punishments that he promised back in Leviticus 26. How many times they disobeyed? Over and over and over again. And when you get into the prophets, they do a really good job of going over the history. You disobeyed then, and then the time after that. Oh, yeah, and don't forget the time after that. Oh, yeah, and after that, you disobeyed like 8 or 10 more times. So stick to it just like God did, and eventually you'll get somewhere. 5-minute break, right? Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes.